What's up? This is your girl T. As a black woman in her 30s, I'm constantly trying to figure out life. But the one time of the week where it all seems to come together is on Sundays. Yeah, that's right. When I talk with my girls at brunch over a glass of champagne. I created this podcast to bring good vibes and open dialogue about various topics from mental health, relationships, personal development, the workspace, to the bubbly that happened over the weekend. Sundays are a time for celebration, rest, and reflection. So welcome to Champagne Sunday. Grab a glass, pop a bottle, and get ready to pour it up. Champagne Sunday is pleased to provide you with social media content for your personal education and informational purposes. Reliance on any information provided by Champagne Sunday or by any person or professional appearing on this podcast is solely at your own risk. Hey, welcome to Champagne Sunday. It's your girl T, and welcome back for another episode. I'm so glad that you're here and so glad that you tuned in to another episode of Champagne Sunday, and I'm honestly glad to be here too. This episode, I'm kind of excited to share, but a little nervous too, because there's a little taboo about what I'm going to talk about. And I've been waiting. Been wanting to do this podcast, but been waiting, slowly because, I wanted to come on with a professional to talk about this, but I think I'm just going to go ahead and share my story because last night, so I am a fan of Snowfall. If you haven't seen it, it's a show on FX. It talks about kind of the crack epidemic in Los Angeles around, I guess it's timed in like 70s, 80s. It's kind of have multiple seasons, so it goes in and out of time periods. But it's a really, really great show. And last night they had a show called Celebration. And the show was pretty much that this intimate, again, if you're not familiar with the show, an intimate couple in the show, an aunt and uncle, they got married and they had a wedding. And again, these are drug dealers. They're black and, and one of their, I guess, associates ended up putting, LSD in the chocolate fountain. And the strawberries were like passed out to everyone. It was passed out to everyone. And so what happened was most people who ate the strawberries at the wedding end up taking a trip because they had LSD or they had, that's what they had said in the show, that it was LSD. And I kind of figured that they were on a trip. And so the main character, Franklin, definitely, because he has a lot of demons in his closet. He has done a lot of things. And again, if you haven't watched the season or the episodes, or you have never watched the show, I really encourage you to go and tune in and look at it. It's a really easy binge. I honestly had not been watching this season, and I started watching the season Monday. And I'm already caught up. And it was like 7 episodes. It's a really easy watch. So go and tune in. It's really good. I mean, it's really good. And then even the main character, again, the actor who plays Franklin, he was just also talking about how next season is going to be the last season of the series, and how he was 23 when they started, and now he's in his 30s. So that was really, really, kind of perspective taking, like, dang, like they really have been doing the show for a long time. But it's good. It's really good. It's a must see. So I encourage you to try it. And I actually, because, I'm bad with names. And this guy, the guy who plays Franklin, he is very attractive. What is his name? I know somebody is probably screaming it too. the speaker right now. Like, his name is that? Damison Idris. I think that's how you say it. Damison Idris. Yes, he is really, 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 really attractive. But anyways, go watch it. Go watch Snowfall. It's really good. But anyways, so this episode again, they had a trip and everyone was on LSD, including Franklin. And so usually, I do a bubbly, and the bubbly is something that is a positive affirmation or something that can get you through the week. I always say this too, because, we have our bubbly and we have our pour it up moments. And our bubbly is something like that encourage you or that, can give you kind of the word. And then the pour it up is like the action, like what you do, like how you get the motivation from the bubbly and then you pour it up like by doing an action with the pour it up moment. And I actually got to get better at sharing my own pour it up moments because I think I've been kind of doing y'all short on those, but I'm going to get better with doing that. And so the bubbly for today, again, we always do the bubbly. I'm going to do something a little different because, again, Snowfall encouraged me to do this episode because I was going to hold off. I really was. So because of Snowfall, I'm going to do a quote from Snowfall. So there was a scene, and this is a little spoiler alert, if you have not seen Snowfall this week, if you are an avid watcher and you haven't seen it this week, this is going to be a little spoiler. So if you need time to log off or pause, go ahead and do it now. I'm going to take a sip of my drink. And today I'm drinking red wine. I'm actually not doing champagne. I'm drinking red wine. But it is just as good. Just as good. Okay. So, all right. So, spoiler alert is done. If you haven't watched it, oh well, I'm about to go into it. So there was a scene where Franklin and his mother, again, they're both on trips. They both had the strawberries and are on LSD right now. And Franklin is like tripping hard. And so his mom realized automatically that she was on LSD. And so she's like, again, she's a different generation. So I'm not surprised that she probably was like, oh, I'm on LSD. So she goes to Franklin because Franklin is tripping. And when I say tripping, not just tripping on a trip, but he's like having a bad trip. And so she probably, I guess, knows her son. So she goes to find him. And of course, she finds him and he's just like freaking out. And so she's comforting him and he's like, I love you. But then it goes real left because he says something like, what is wrong? What's wrong? And she goes, and then again, this is your true responses. She goes, and this is going to be our bubbly for today. Just a quote from the movie. Or I'm acting like it's a movie, but the quote from the show is, I got a son that puts white people before their father and money before God. That's what's wrong. Everything you do for yourself. That's not what your father taught you. That's not what your mother taught you. Where does that come from? And so I like that scene because I think it was really the premise of basically what the mom said was really the premise of the rest of the episode, or the battle, or the demons that Franklin was fighting within himself, because it was, you put everything, you put yourself, your needs, what you want before everything else, but you say it's for the greater cause, but you say it's for the greater good, you say you're helping out, but in reality you're only helping yourself. You're only doing things that are very self-serving. And I really liked that. I really liked that scene. I really liked that quote, because I think it really puts things, if you watch the show again, it puts a lot into perspective about the decisions that Franklin has been making. And I think this too kind of ties into what I want to talk about, which is basically my first experience on shrooms, or what is also known as, the real name is psilocybin. Almost said it wrong there. So I want to just share my experience about how I ended up doing shrooms one day and having a similar, well, no, I definitely didn't have a similar experience to Franklin and Snowfall, which is also interesting too, just kind of thinking about Snowfall, is that when I go back and think about the seasons, I also remember Teddy having an experience in the woods when he was in the jungle. He also was given a tea, and he was given like LSD to take a trip and to kind of self-reflect. I remember that was kind of the negotiation to be able to be a part of like the village that he had to do it at that time with, I guess, that girl he was with. I can't even remember who that was. So many seasons ago. But Teddy also had an experience with SOD during the season or series. So it's interesting that we get to see what Franklin gets to face. So one day I was in the kitchen. I wasn't really doing much. I knew it was going to be one of those weekends where I didn't do much of anything. I just kind of chilled out in the house and wasn't going to go anywhere. And my friend texted me and said, and I'm not going to say any names, and said, and she just put like the mushroom emoji, was seeing if you wanted to take a trip, and then the cartwheel emoji. And then I said, LMAO, what time? Is this your first time? You going to stay in the house or go out? And she said, I literally just got out from a nap, so I want to shower, and then it's whatever. Now I've done it before and I want to stay in. It's not kind of thing that you want to be out and do. And so I think I was like a little, like, ooh, like, I don't know. But I was like, okay, I'm trying to finish up some work stuff. Let me think about it. And then I kind of asked her about her experiences. And I was like, just the thought of it low key scares me because of everything that I've seen on TV is always to the extreme. And I was like, all right. And so then basically she told me like what she was thinking. She told me what she saw, and I'm going to get into details of that. And she kind of told me that. So then, me, I like to, again, listen to podcasts. And I remember recently listening to a podcast where one of the hosts was like, yeah, I took it. And she said she saw Beyonce in a dryer, like spinning in the dryer, right? And was singing. And I thought that was funny. But of course, my friend always like is very insightful about things. So she was like, how much do you have to idolize Beyonce for her to come up in your trip? And I was like, what? And she was like, well, how much do you have to idolize somebody like a celebrity for them to actually come up in your trip? And at the time I was like, I guess I thought it was just funny. But again, she's very insightful and brings like things into like, think about that. And I was like, I didn't think about that. So pretty much before I said yes, I was just kind of like doing research and trying to figure out like if this is something I wanted to do. But I definitely was like, yeah, I'll come over and chill and I'll figure out if I want to do it or not. She was like, yeah, that's cool. No pressure. So, I, got myself together and I went over to her house. And so again, asking her more questions about her experience and what she's done and how she's done it. But one of the things, again, before I go into kind of like what she has experienced, I like to look at, again, talking about television, I like to look at this show on Netflix called Explain It or Explained. And they had an episode about psychedelics. So I wanted to go on the episode and I was just like, I wanted to see more about what it means. Like, what is it? And so in the opening of the show, they really talked about how there's a link between psychedelics and anxiety and the use of the drugs and anxiety. And that pretty much like it was discovered in a lab. And I think the scientist, he accidentally kind of discovered LSD, mixing up chemicals. And he took a large amount of it, like a higher dose that he was supposed to. And from there, they started to kind of experiment like what it could be used for. Like it was like, okay, now we have this drug. Well, how can we use it or what it could be used for? And so kind of before I think for a minute or for some time, people were using it and realizing that it was, again, a drug that could be used to open up your neural pathways, to be able to help with anxiety, to help to alleviate fears, to help you confront yourself. Because apparently, and again, I don't want to say this wrong, I think, so it's like the disillusion of the self and of the ego. So you're able to kind of merge with this larger interconnectedness when you basically are on LSD, because of what it does to the brain. But of course, like all things, especially like when we think about like America and how things are set up, that over time it became to be like, a dispel, like these things are still drugs. Like it became a stigma surrounding drugs and surrounding SLD or LSD. And look, SLD, girl, specific learning disability. I'm a school psychologist. Dispelling LSD, and that basically it was kind of this uproar of like, this melts your brain, it's not good, that, pretty much that it's too potent and that you should dispel it. So I think one of the things that I do remember from the Explain It was that it was an article of a man, like, again, this is around like the 60s or the 70s, right? So before, I guess, kind of the prime of the 60s, 70s, he was on a magazine cover, the front of the cover, about the greatness of LSD. And then when the whole dispel and stigma came about, he was like retracted and it was kind of looked frowned upon or whatever. And so basically, again, it talked just kind of about like the political agendas and prevailing social trends as educational and government institutions kind of perform like this severe U-turns on the topic of LSD. And so basically, but even through that, they talked about kind of, again, that's the history of it, that a lot of times people were using, when it kind of started to come back into the forefront, a lot of therapists were using it as for therapy or part of therapy. And so they were, again, saying like the parallels are drawn between the connections established between mindfulness and meditation and psychedelics, and that basically psychedelics takes you to another level of mindfulness. Because if you've ever practiced mindfulness and meditation, it's about focusing in the moment and focusing on the here and now. And they were saying that basically it's the crash course to mindfulness and meditation if you do psychedelics. And so because of that, people are able to engage more and talk therapy and their therapeutic experiences than they were in the past. And I think it was a guy who was saying that, after he did that, he, I can't remember what it was. It like losing weight, or was something that he was addicted to that he stopped using, or he realized that he no longer needed the need for it. And then even my friend was saying that once they had it, they stopped drinking alcohol, so that it does have some mental health effects, right? Some good things on your well-being. And they were saying that basically the experience or these trips should be with the guiding influence of a shaman or modern day Western scientist, like a psychologist or therapist, or someone who can kind of guide you through it and help you understand the potential, the malleability of psychedelics, and that recreational users have contributed to the massive popularity of the drugs, but also to the lack of understanding surrounding them. So kind of like an irony, and that it's a lingering obstacle for those who kind of just want to get high, and for those who have a higher purpose and want to merge with the universe in their trips. And so I thought it was very informative. I thought, again, it was called The Mind Explained. It's on Netflix. It's really good, and they have different topics, but I always love the topics like these about psychedelics and mind control and all of those things. They have really good topics. So, and even nowadays, like, again, psychedelics first gained widespread popularity in like the 1960s and the 70s, and then kind of went underground after being classified as kind of like a controlled substance by the federal government in like 1970, I think. Nowadays, and I was just kind of looking up an article that like John Hopkins and all of these other researchers and NIH are looking back into psychedelics and figuring out how they can be instrumental and a tool with therapy. And so, again, kind of looking at that, it requires special care and supervision, and that is something that they said that the data suggests that the benefit actually comes from the experience someone has and their conscious reflection. They added, because I'm kind of reading from this USA Today article, and they said like antidepressants, which make someone may feel more better automatically. It's helping them to operate above the surface level. So basically, it allows you to go beyond the surface level, because LSD, shrooms, and like psilocybin allows you to go beyond your ego. It lets you to let that part go. And basically, your ego is the realistic part of you. So you might have heard about your id and your ego. Your id is your like your instinctual self, and then your ego is, if you said your id is like, I want to eat right now, and then your ego is like, oh, you can't eat right now because you're in a meeting and this is really important. So your ego is usually really controlling, and it kind of controls the id's impulses, right? And so our ego is what we know and who we believe ourselves to be. It refers to just, again, like our external context, our family, our personalities, our identities. And so when you end up, again, taking LSD or psilocybin, I'm going to get that word right. Psilocybin, my goodness. That it allows you to kind of just let go and to really be able to see beyond yourself and beyond the surface. So again, another aspect of mindfulness, and also why they believe that it helps so much in therapy. And so I thought that was interesting. I think, so they're saying that this can maybe be a replacement for like antidepressant medication and an alternative form of therapy when regular therapy isn't really being beneficial to certain individuals. And I thought that was interesting. And I also remember like Will Smith and Megan Fox and other people also praising psychedelics and saying that they've had trips with shamans and been able to kind of process and see themselves and do this. So again, it's kind of double. It's sometimes people use it for recreational use, and then sometimes also people use it for, again, to have a connection or to kind of learn more about themselves. And again, it can cause, like, I think the downfall, like when we see is like the recreational use, is that people do report like anxiety, having frightening hallucinations, paranoia, and confusion, and like what we would colloquially say a bad trip. But again, there has been data to support that when people use it, again, with a shaman or in a controlled environment, I guess you can say, that they do have some positives in that to influence like serotonin levels in the brain, leading to kind of like, you may have, again, altered perceptions and things of that nature. But it also, again, when I was looking at explain it, that it opens up different neural pathways and makes connections for different ideas. And basically, when you think about your brain, right? So you'll have, as you get older, as an adult, you'll have pathways that you continue to go through all the time. So like if you think about snow and a sled, like you always go that route. Or if like, even if you're in the woods and you know how people have made like pathways because you're always taking that pathway. Well, usually our brains develop kind of like routine, and the neural pathways that our brains connect ideas, they're always going through the same pathway. But they were saying like psilocybin, what it does is that it creates new neural pathways that you haven't explored yet. That a lot of researchers at like Johns Hopkins, again, found that psilocybin was effective treatment for depression, for nicotine and alcohol addiction, also for substance disorders, that they've shown the magic mushrooms were effective in relieving emotional distress of people with life-threatening cancer diagnoses. So I think that was kind of the thing that was interesting to me. All right. So basically that's kind of like my educational piece. And that's kind of why I wanted someone to come in and speak on that, because I wanted someone who knew more. But, I do my little research and that's what I can give you. But I really encourage you to do more research on that. If you are thinking about trying, that you do your own research, that you consult people, and that you consult professionals, or you consult your Google and do research, and also thinking about accredited sites and sources, as well as articles that have been research based and peer reviewed, to kind of get information about those. And I also would say too, before I get into my experience, that this is a disclaimer. Again, I've kind of shied away from wanting to talk about this because there is a negative connotation or a stigma with doing these types of drugs. And honestly, before I did the research, I honestly was like, oh, that's on some weight. That's, because, Black people and drugs, we don't really like to take a lot of, I'm not going to say Black people don't do drugs, because we do. But we usually stick with in the lane of marijuana and alcohol. And sometimes when we see other people doing other extreme things, we're like, woo, child. Yes, so that was kind of like my notion as well. So again, this is just a disclaimer that I know sometimes my family and friends are listening and they might have like, ooh, that's what Tanisha did. But yes, this is what Tanisha did. This is a no judgment zone. This is a safe space, and we are entering it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So, as I said, I got to my friend's house. I watched the Explained It. And after, again, looking at it, I was like, I think I want to try this. I want to see what this is like. So my friend definitely loved her vibe. She's an amazing and awesome person. And I love how she sets things up. And so her house is always like really clean too. Like, side note, love her house is always clean. But anyways, she had like dim lighting. She had a projector of a moon that was on the wall. She had a crystal lamp. She also had a, what is it called? A bowl, like, the bowl that rings, like you can ring around the bowl and it dings and it makes a sound, and then you listen to the sound go far away. I don't know the proper name for what that is called, but she had one of those. I thought that was cool. And she had a big one too, like a really nice one. And we also had like a playlist. We had a Cleo Soul. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Cleo Soul, but her music is dope and very relaxing. So I ended up putting on Cleo Soul because I just love her music. It's really good. And all of the music was on there. So it was really good. Like Alexis Haley, all that type. I don't know if people know who that is, but a lot of good music that was on there. She also had an astrology blanket that had all of the astrological signs on there, and she kind of guided me to use the blanket when I felt stuck or lost to garner some energy. And so I thought that was pretty cool and relaxing too, that we didn't really always have to just like stay on the couch, because we were usually on the couch looking at the projected moon. But we kind of shifted our energies and our movements as well. And I was on the floor sometimes too, like kind of stretched out, looking at the ceiling, and kind of in the zone and in my space. So my friend was my guide, and she was a very great guide, I would say, because she answered all of my questions about this experience. She went in detail about her experience and her advice, answered all of my questions. I just really appreciated that, right? And so, I think it's important, if you don't have someone professionally, like a therapist, or you're doing that you still do this in a controlled environment or setting, especially for your first time, because I think that's just important. I mean, and I think, again, it's kind of interesting because I'm talking about doing drugs, but it's like, we're talking about doing drugs in a very responsible way, which I think that goes with a lot of drugs, right? Like, we drink alcohol and we try to be responsible when we drink alcohol, and and I know people who do marijuana and try to be responsible when they smoke weed or, engage in those things. So it's all about kind of, again, doing things in a controlled environment and doing things in a responsible manner, right? My friend said to me in her experiences that, again, she's done it over different times. She has little mushrooms and she puts them in tea, and she makes tea with ginger, and then she puts the mushrooms at the bottom of the tea and she makes it that way. And she said that she told me what she normally does, her dosage, and that she's experimented kind of which dosage is right for her. That she realized that going at a higher dosage isn't the best because you don't get a lot of control over your trip. Like, she was just saying like certain dosages you're able to still be in some type of form of control, which you want. And so I thought that was good as well. So I think an important tip too that she told me, because even when I watched the Explained It, that everybody's trip is different. Everyone is going to have a different experience. You think about, okay, everybody's experience is different. And kind of going back to Snowfall, how Franklin had such a bad trip, because he also had a lot of demons. And when I say demons, are a lot of bad things that he had not confronted that he did. He had a lot of guilt. And when I say demons, like demons are things that you're holding. So his demon was guilt. He had a lot of guilt about the things that he had done that was not, again, that was self-serving. And so that came to confront him. So it's the same thing. If you are holding on to something that is negative, or that you have something that is you've done in the past that you may feel guilty for, or that you may feel embarrassed about. Same thing, maybe even if you had trauma or those things and you haven't resolved it, it could probably lead to a bad trip, especially if you're going to consistently think about it in that moment. It will lead to a bad trip. Which again, a bad trip is that you have very negative and dark hallucinations and thoughts, our anxiety, our fears. Like you'll have a feeling of fear. You might have dark, again, hallucinations. Those are the things that are considered a bad trip. I also think that my Explain It gave me some false expectations about what my trip was going to be, but I'm going to get into that too. So it was a different experience done with like mushrooms that were kind of grind with the tea and the ginger. And I didn't feel anything at first, right? So I was just kind of like sipping my tea, like sip, sip, sip. I was sipping my tea. And I thought possibly, I was like, maybe I need a higher dosage because I don't feel anything. So I'm just like sipping my tea. And then my friend pointed out, was like, girl, are you eating the mushrooms? And I was like, no. And she was like, well, you're not going to feel anything. Because she was sitting over there like, oh, I'm feeling it. Like, I feel it. And I'm like, I don't feel nothing. And she was like, I feel it. She was like, you don't feel it yet? And I was like, no, I don't feel anything. And she was like, are you eating? She was like, I don't see you chewing. And because at one point she did see, she was like, oh, you chewing a lot. And I was like, I haven't even started my tea. I'm chewing gum. She was like, oh. And then when I did start drinking the tea, she was like, she's like, I don't see you chewing. I don't see you. And I was like, oh, I'm not eating the mushrooms at the bottom. She was like, girl, you got to eat the mushrooms at the bottom. Like the tea is just supposed to help, like, for you to digest it. But you got to like eat the shrooms at the bottom. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, you know, rookie mistake. So, anyways, so we're sitting there, it's like dark and we got the projector on and we're listening to music. And then I started to realize like my ADHD, like I'm very restless. I can be very inattentive and I can be an overthinker. I think that was preventing me from fully immersing in the experience because most of the time I was thinking like, this shit is not going to work. Like but I was like, this shit is not going to work. This is not real. Like this is just like weird. I guess. And so I was like, whatever. And so anyways, when we were looking at like the projector on the wall, again, it's like a moon that is projected onto the wall. And so the colors and images, like the walls, like I could start to see like little faces in the moon. But at the same time, I was like, am I just making this shit up? Like, I don't know if I'm really like seeing faces or if I'm like making up faces. Like, am I making this up or do I really see something? And so that's like one of the first things is like if I'm staring off and I'm like, oh, I think I see a face or image within the moon. That was the one thing. And then I think the walls and the blinds were kind of like blurry and they were like moving slightly, but it was like nothing too scary or weird. It was like they were kind of moving like waves, like it was something like wavy. But it was nothing too scary, or I was like, okay, I guess. In order to begin the trip, my friend suggested I kind of stare at one point and just stay there. somewhat like a mindfulness meditation, like just kind of stare into the space and just like stay there. And so I started to stare at the wall and at the projected image. Again, I kept staring at the moon and the wall. And again, I just saw different faces while looking at the wall. I saw like an older woman. I think that was the most prominent face, along with a strong man who looked like he was embracing an object or holding a boulder. I also saw a pregnant woman and a man. But again, this is not like, it's not like I saw these people like walking around like little holograms. Like I just saw these images in the moon. It was like, you know, if you look at the in the clouds in the sky and you're like, oh, what is that? You know, the game that kids play, like, oh, what is that cloud shaped like? That's shaped like a cow. That one's shaped like da-da-da. That's kind of what I saw in the moon. It was like different shapes, but it wasn't like I actually like saw a person like walking around or doing anything. I didn't see anything like that. That was just it. I think when I was listening, I can't say when I was listening to the music, like words were louder or like they sounded louder. Certain words like jumped at me. So like the word love resonated with me the most, especially as I started to stare at the blinds. And then during this time, my friend was like talking. So again, she was kind of like guiding, and I can't even remember what she was talking about at the time, but she was just talking and I guess explaining her own journey. And so it was very therapeutic when she was talking, because I don't know, it kind of fit with the song that came on, because the song was a Snow Allegra song that I really like. And then from there, like I had like tears were kind of coming from my eyes. So no, as you're listening to this, you're like, none of this seems to make sense, Tanisha. None of this is connected. And honestly, to me, it wasn't. And so, yeah, like, so tears kind of came from my eyes, but I wasn't feeling sad. I don't want to say I felt depressed or anything. I just was like in a state. Like I definitely know I was in a state. I felt kind of paralyzed and like I couldn't move and had no choice but just to embrace it. So like in the show Snowfall, Franklin's mom told him to just go with the flow. Like you have to go with the trip. And my friend told me that too. She said, no matter what happens, like you just don't fight it, just go with it. Because if you fight it, kind of like what I was saying, I'm fighting it with my thoughts of kind of like, this is not real. I don't really see this. This is not going to work. Then it's probably not like you're going to fight against it. It's either going to be bad or it's going to ruin your trip. So I felt paralyzed, but I didn't feel like paralyzed. Like I was like in fear, like, oh my gosh. Like I just kind of like, it felt more like a stillness, a calmness, like be still, like be here, be now, like just be still. And yeah, it wasn't uncomfortable. But again, I just kind of felt like the same, like be still, feel, and listen. Be still, feel, and listen. That's what came from that. Be still, feel, and listen. I think a lot of times, now that I think about it, my friend was talking about surrendering a lot. Talked about surrendering, letting go. Her trip was a little different. So she would verbalize what she was experiencing at her trip. So she did actually see things. So, but this is maybe the only, like, oh, okay, maybe I really was on something. Was that she said that she saw a Candyland, right? A place with strawberries, and she said the walls were like strawberries and icing, or like strawberry shortcake and icing. She said that all of the walls were like strawberries. And she said the place symbolized love. So again, that word love was coming out a lot, like love, surrendering, and kind of being still in the moment. And that kind of further connected me to the word love. So if songs were playing, I felt like that, like words would come out or they would jump out at me. And sometimes it would be like love or like thinking about love. That really, really played a part in my trip. But she said that sometimes you can share a trip. Like, so if you can connect, she verbalized what she was seeing and what she was going through. So sometimes you can share it with the person. Now, although I never saw anything that she saw remotely to like that Candyland or that strawberry world, I did at one point started to smell strawberries very intensely. Like very intensely. Like I was like, oh wow, like it was very intense. But it's like as soon as I started to think, like, because my brain does it again, I don't know if it's ADHD or what, my brain goes, that's not real, Tanisha, stop thinking about that, that's not real. it's always like a little, that's not real. It kind of let go. But I had to really, you had to really focus in it. And she even said that to hold the place in the Candyland, like every time she was trying to explore, she would lose it. It would pull out. So you really have to be, again, I see why people say it's like a crash course of mindfulness, because you really have to be mindful in whatever you're experiencing or your senses is telling you to experience. So yeah, throughout the experience, I felt conflicted about like myself. I noticed that my need for control is kind of possibly debilitating and not beneficial. Like, again, that surrendering piece, I was so unable to really surrender. But again, the only thing that was prominent was, again, that smell. And I know that she said she could smell it too. And I could smell like the icing. But I couldn't see the place. I just smelled it was strong. And anytime I became distracted, it went away. But then when I was focused, it came back. And so you really have to be focused. It also sometimes seemed like my nose was blocked and my sense of smell was gone. But then if I focused, it would come back. So I never really saw like the Candyland place, but the smell was really, really strong. When it was done, I think I kind of looked at myself in the mirror in the bathroom, and I really saw my pupils, and they were like fully dilated. So I was like, yeah, I'm definitely under the influence. And I started to just like stare at myself in the mirror until it seemed like I wasn't myself, but I kind of quickly regained control. So I think a lot of the times you can control what happens and what doesn't happen I think, again, like my friend said, if you have a good balance of the LSD. And I think, again, going back to Snowfall, Franklin had a lot of them strawberries. Like, he was gobbling them strawberries down. And so I'm pretty sure his dosage of LSD was really high. So from what she told me, like, if your dosage is like really high, it comes to a place where you don't really have control of what you see or what you do or pulling yourself in and out. Like, it just it's like you're just gonna have to experience it and let the trip be. And I think she said that was kind of a scary part. So it's always good to kind of have a good amount or a moderate amount. And so, but overall, it was just like a calming and relaxing experience. I think it was a vibe. And the setting made it feel good. It made it feel positive. It made it feel natural. I feel like I honestly can say this. It was a better feeling than doing edibles. Like, edibles can make you feel so out of it and so out of control. Like, you don't have any control about what's happening or what's gonna go left or go right. Like, it was way better than edibles. I mean, you know, when you do an edible, it's just kind of like you're at the mercy of the edible. But I really felt like I was in control. Like, I could pull myself in and out. I felt more in control of like the space. I could be introspective and think things through. And now that, and when I look back and when I was sober, I realized now how efficient psychedelics were, and I would definitely probably try it again. I also journaled during the experience and kind of, I reviewed my notes, and I talked a lot about, I think, friendships in my notes. I know, I was kind of hesitant about sharing this whole experience because I knew a few would probably wouldn't understand and probably would misinterpret it. Because, again, the thought of like consuming shrooms without education seems like a wild idea. It's like, oh, it's real recreational and real loose. And even when I was thinking about what it is, I always just kind of imagine like Get 'Em to the Greek type of thing, like when they're rubbing like the fur wall and people are just like partying and all over the place and doing wild stuff, and it's like, that's not my vibe. But being, again, in a controlled environment, listening to music, the lighting, the ambiance, I think that was just, and doing it with a trusted friend, I think that was good for me. I don't know if I would ever do it and like, oh, I'm gonna go out to a party or anything. I like how they did on a Snowfall, like, oh, it was a celebration. No, but I definitely did, again, journal during the experience. And I wrote things, again, about like just friendships and just how to expand on friendships and set boundaries with friendships. and making sure that sometimes my friend groups and things overlap a lot. And so I think when I was in my, again, trip, I was getting, I guess, the message of sometimes everything doesn't have to be shared or overlapped, that there can also be special moments or special things that you share with particular friends. I think that's what kind of stood out. And then I think I did have like some handshaking, but nothing weird, like nothing like heart beating really fast or like heart palpitations or feeling like you were on speed it was none of that. It was very relaxed, very calming. I cried a lot, and not really like a boohoo cry, like I said, but just shedding tears. It was like a reckoning, I guess, but it was difficult to fully get in touch with the feeling of what was happening because my thoughts often interrupted the feeling. Like I often was like, what is going on here? So sometimes the tears were connected, I think, to emotion and like realizations. But then at other times, I was just like unaware of why I was crying. I had like no hallucinations, but I did again saw images moving within the projected moon. I also saw a picture, like I was looking at a portrait, and I saw the woman in the portrait like kind of move or like shift in the image. So I may have experienced like optical illusions, but more so than hallucinations. I didn't really have any hallucinations. Afterwards, I did feel like when I was like completely coming like down off of everything and I was like thinking about my trip, I felt a little ominous, kind of like scary feeling, but there was really like no reason to feel that. And so I just kind of attribute that being like the dissonance resulting from like the transition between tripping and being sober. But other than that, I think my experience was really calming. And again, just taking back to the knowledge kind of that I was attempting to drop. I don't even want to say I dropped some knowledge because again, I'm learning and I'm new to this whole process and everything. And this happened a while ago. I told you, I've been sitting on this for a while because I just didn't feel comfortable sharing. And I also wanted to share with a professional, and I really wanted to talk more about what psychedelics and therapy could look like, because I think that's an interesting concept, especially as a psychologist. But I definitely could see how it could work. It could free up some of that mental space that a lot of us use. But again, I think I probably would have needed like a little higher dosage because my thoughts really interrupted a lot of the process. Like I like the aspect of having control over pulling in and out of the trip, but I also don't like the fact that if you do have anxiety or if you do have something like ADHD or you are an overthinker, that is going to kind of take away from your trip. So I think that was the hardest part, but I think it forces you to practice mindfulness and forces you to be still and kind of be introspective about yourself and about like what you're feeling. Honestly, it definitely gave a different perspective of what I would say LSD or psychedelics or psilocybin is. Most time people would, say it's a party drug or it's recreational, but I can definitely see how it's reflective and how shamans and other healers and mental health professionals and researchers use it as a treatment piece. So that is my story. Hope that you enjoyed this episode of Champagne Sunday. Thank you again for tuning in. And, I do want to start figuring out how we can open up dialogue and conversation about things, because I know people want to respond and say and share comments. So, you can always go to the Instagram page, which is Champagne Sunday Podcast, and drop comments and leave some things in the DMs or wherever and just kind of start a dialogue and conversation. And let's talk about it. I'm like totally here for it. So with that being said, this is the end of the episode, and thank you again for tuning in. Oh wait, pause, stop, rewind. I did say today I was going to do a pour it up, because I was like, I always leave it to my guests to do a pour it up moment, and I never do a pour it up moment. So let's see, let me do a pour it up moment. My poured up moment is, again, in sight with this whole podcast and kind of what I shared about my experience. I'm going to go into the week being more mindful of how my body feels and what I'm doing. And I think, again, kind of even going back to Snowfall, about sometimes you do things and you think you're doing it for the better good, but it's very self-serving. My goal is to do more in a way that I'm living more for not myself, but doing my work and how I live day to day, that I put God first and I first go to him before doing things. So like small things, for instance, like in the morning when I wake up, instead of going straight to Instagram, going to my Bible app first and kind of reading scripture and doing my like Bible plans. Also thinking about how my work, or how God can influence my work and the clients that I work with, and talking to families and parents and those things, and putting him first and guiding and using that as a guide, I think is something that how I can be more mindful. Because I think honestly, it's easy to kind of get bogged down with just the flow or the rotation of things, and you're not mindful of the day to day. But I think being more mindful of how I operate, how I bring God into the things that I'm doing in my life. And so I think that is how I am pouring it up for the week ahead. And I think that kind of solidifies this whole episode, is just to be mindful and a little open-minded, I guess, too. But mostly just mindful to different experiences and where you are in life in the here and now. All right, so that was my poured up moment, and I will talk to you next week. Peace.